So this is what we're going to end up with, or something similar. The main thing here is the wormhole effect, that the astronaut is flying down the middle here. And another section of the class is we're going to rig and animate this astronaut at mixamo.com and then bring it back into Cinema 4D to combine with our wormhole animation, which by the way is also looped. So the initial section is only about 16 seconds long, but this version we see here is nearly 3 minutes. So when it gets to the end, it repeats seamlessly. So that's another aspect of this project that we're going to have to look at. In Cinema 4D, this is what the scene looks like. This is an overview, kind of a third-person view. We see the camera flying down, the wormhole effect. This blue thing you see is the fog light, which we see in the distance here. So we're also going to throw that in at the end. If I just disable a couple of things here, such as this spline wrap, you see it's going to turn our tunnel into this straight shape. So the wormhole sort of swirl shape that was done by, once we create the galaxies effect and then we wrap it around this spline you see here. And it's also the same spline that our camera and character are traveling along. And all of that combined gives us the final effect. So in a new scene, let's get an arc. And I think I'm too zoomed in. Here we go. Put this into an extrude. And let's see some lines on this. On the arc, we're going to drop the number down to the intermediate points here, down to 1. And the extrude is going to be offset to 2500. In older versions of Cinema 4D, that's the Z movement. You have X, Y, and Z. In this new version, we just have a single offset, and then we change the direction using this control here, but automatically it was correct anyway. And the subdivision I am going to set to 50. This section we have just generated, this is going to be equivalent to one of these galaxy images. So there are 6 around the astronaut at any point, and then we also clone them into their distance. But that initial section is just 6 images being wrapped around in a shape like this. These are the images we are going to use for this. So let's bring them into Cinema 4D, into the materials section. We can just click no repeatedly. And quickly applying the first image to our geometry, you can see it's all stretched, and that's part of the effect. It's also going to have to be in the luminance channel. So let's drag this color image into the luminance channel and then turn off color and reflectance. Also, for a better preview, we can go to each of these images. In the viewport tab, let's set the preview size to 1024. So we get a higher resolution preview in our viewport. So right now we just have this single arc. This needs to be cloned into a circle and then into their distance. And the setup for this was as follows. I created a guide plane. Let's give this 1 and 1 segments. 50 by 50, and we are going to put this into a cloner, change the mode to radial with the count at 6, and the plane is going to be XY, so it faces this direction. So then I can take the geometry itself, the original piece, and clone that, set the mode to object, and the object is going to be our guide plane. So this cloner we created earlier. So this is going to be the cloner guide number 1. We need to change a few things in the new cloner, the pitch rotation in the transform tab, this should be 90 degrees. So this face the correct direction. Also, the distribution should be polygon center. So we have one clone per polygon from our guide. We can see they don't line up. So in the guide, the radius should be dropped down to 0 centimeters. And that's how that looks. So this would be the single section, except we are applying that same material. So let's make some copies to this. Let's start with just the 6, which are going to be visible, and apply the rest of these materials. So just the first 6 so far. And by the way, all of these need to be in the luminance channel. So if we open up one material, and then in the attributes manager, let's actually select all of them first and enable luminance to reveal the luminance channel over here in the attributes. If we keep this window open and go to color, and over here go to luminance, we can just drag directly from the same material to itself, but in that different channel. So that's the quickest way to do this. But I am going to skip ahead to when I have finished. And this is the last one. We can go to all of these and disable the color and reflectance. I'm going to hide our guide momentarily here and also go to filter and hide the work plane so nothing is in the way. We do have another issue, which is that these are currently overlapping. So we need to go to the cloner, MoGraph effector, and random, and we're going to randomize their position. Anything between 20 to 25 in all the directions is going to help to just make sure that these don't sit on the exact same spot. So we end up just making sure they don't overlap. So we have fixed the overlap issue, but they're still not blending together compared to what we see here, where going around, they do blend together, and also going far into the distance. You never really see where one galaxy or nebula begins because of the way they are blended together. So a note about this is that you will need a certain type of image that's going to work better, and anything that's brighter in the middle and darker around the edges, that's going to be better. So all of these images share that characteristic. You see most of the detail and color is in the middle, and then it gets darker around the edges. The aspect ratio of the image doesn't matter too much because it's going to be stretched anyway, which is all part of the effect, but it will help if the images are darker around the edges. Because what we can do is go to the alpha channels of all of these, and let's enable that. This is a case where we're going to have to do that trick again, where we drag the same image from the luminance channel to the alpha this time. So it's a bit tedious, but it shouldn't take too long. So after doing this, we saw the materials update in the viewport. And of course, the way alpha channel works is that the darker parts of the image will be transparent and we see the brighter parts, but we need to make some adjustments to this. So if I select all the materials, let's go to the alpha channel, and we are going to drop this into a filter. And then let's go into that and colorize, first of all, to make it black and white, because alpha channels tend to be black and white typically, and it creates an improvement straight away. Then we want to create more contrast, so go and enable clipping, and the low clipping is going to be at 10% roughly, and then the high clip, bring that down to about 70. This should work in general for all the various maps, but it's also a good idea to just go in and fine-tune that based on that particular map to try and extract as much detail as possible whilst also creating a good blend effect. So this one maybe is going to be 10 and 60 to just help to bring up some of that lighter areas. It was disappearing a bit too much. Maybe even as low as 50 can work here. And with the low clip, we were trying to get rid of some of these gray values around the edge. So maybe about 12% on this particular image. Let's go to the next one. And I'm just going to fine tune this once again. This was generally darker around the edges, so 10% is probably going to be okay. And also 70 is fine. Okay, and after a few adjustments, this is where I ended up. A quick render. This is one of the single sections. Now we need to clone this going back in that direction as well. So for this, we need to update our guide. We are going to clone that initial section a second time. It's going to be a linear clone, and it's going to be in the Z direction with a space of 2000. So going back that way, if we update our cloner to be this new level, we see we have just extended it backwards, and then we can go in here and add more clones. So the number was 10 in the original example, and each section is 2000 centimeters. So altogether, that's going to total up to about 20,000 centimeters. So remember that number because it's going to come up later. Now, our geometry is actually a bit longer than 2000, which means that we're going to get some overlapping in between the various sections, which of course is something we want in order to blend between these different nebulas from one to the next. So with our guide updated, we can also throw in these other maps, these remaining 3. Let's make a couple of more copies of the extruded sections. This is 7, 8, and 9. This is going to help break up the repeating pattern we were seeing a moment ago. And we can also go to the cloner and set this to random. That's going to help with the general effect, except in some cases it's actually worse. So a better way to create more randomness would be to have more materials to work with, different colored galaxies and nebulas, for example. We don't have more images, but there is a trick we can do. If I change this back to iterate, I am going to copy all of these just once. And in all of them, let's go to the color channel or the luminance channel where the color is coming from. We are going to drop this into a filter. We want to use the hue slider to change the colors. So on this first one, we can go into the filter, and then just by sliding the hue, it's going to generate a different colored nebula. We can just scrub through the entire range and see what's going to look good. I find a lot of the time you could just go halfway at 180 degrees, which is going to give you a color far enough from the original to where it's going to be quite different. But you don't always have to go that far. Sometimes just a minor adjustment is going to give you something that looks different. Anyway, with this one, I'm going to go further to the end. I quite like these teal and purple tones from this. Let's stop about there. On this one, we could go maybe just halfway again. It creates this really cool orange in the middle and then the cyan around the edges. On the mat number 4 copy, we can just move this one slightly, but maybe over on the other side. Just a more red version of itself. And just go through these, making those kinds of adjustments. It shouldn't take too long. We could even do things like mess with the saturation. So maybe about 10% extra on this one. And that's it. I would be happy to stop there. We can view our materials with larger icons so we can see the previews a bit better. Let's copy more extruders to map these extra materials onto. So copying all 9 at once. Then starting with this new copied material with the different colors, we can add to this list. So with the extra variation, it's going to help sell the overall effect. Let's call our cloner guide number 2 and close it, or rather hide it so it's not in the way. And we have good blending going around this way, but the in-between, it's a bit too empty there. You can clearly see some gaps from one section to the next. So the way to fix this is to simply select the extruded sections and increase the offset. We are going to go with 4000, which is going to make them overlap some more and close up those open areas. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Let's go and just bring back our work plane. It's always a useful guide. The next step here is to create the swirling tunnel effect, because right now it's just completely straight. And this was done with the helix spline, which I rotated 90 degrees, or 180 degrees rather, and set the height to 20,000. That's going to be the height of this single section altogether. Unfortunately, this is a bit broken in Cinema 4D at 23, and I couldn't quite work out why. You see, this helix spline is supposed to be perfectly straight to where it begins, but for some reason it does this weird hook thing. I tried this in version 21 and there was no issues, so I think it's just a bug in R23. But we can fix it by going to the intermediate points and setting this to none. Now it means that our spline is not going to be as smooth, so we need to compensate for this by going to the helix spline and then setting the subdivisions to something much higher. I'm going to go for 1000 just to make sure we still get a pretty smooth spline. It's going to be important when we do things like attach our camera to it. We want some smooth motion when the camera is moving along that spline. Anyway, this is going to be the helix wrap, because along with this, we are also going to take our cloner setup and put this into a connect. And let's just put that under there. This turns this into a single object, and we are also going to override the axis of the cloner. So click center axis, and if I zoom out from a distance here, this is when the cloner was using its own axis, just basically how we built it, and overriding it with the connect object. So it's possible to actually just wrap the cloner on its own onto the helix spline. But from doing some tests, I found I got better results by putting into a connect first and then wrapping it onto the spline. Which, by the way, for that we need to create a new null, place the connect under this, get our spline wrap deformer, put this in the same hierarchy but below the connect, and you'll see it will automatically sort of contain this whole connect setup. so we know it's working. But then we also need to set the spline. So in the spline wrap controls, under Object tab, throw in the helix into the spline section. And something is happening, but in the wrong direction. So we need to change the axis from X to Z+. And now you see it's being wrapped along our spline. And so if we get a camera, we can animate it to go along there too. I'm going to hide the spline wrap though, so we don't see it in the viewport. Let's get a camera, and looking through it, we are gonna go to animation tags and align to spline, and using the same spline as our wrap, but maybe it's a good idea to separate these. So make a copy, call the new one helix camera, so exact same properties, just a different object, and use that on the spline path. Right away it's going to snap to somewhere at the beginning, and if I were to scrub through the position, you see we travel through that spline or along that spline. Click tangential to make sure it's always facing and following the orientation of the spline, and that creates a better motion. So this is the value we are going to animate. Go back to frame 0, and my timeline is going to be at 20 seconds. Whilst I'm at it, let me check that I am using 24 FPS, so Control D, project settings, and FPS is going to be at 24. At frame 0, let's set the position to 0% as well. It looks like it's facing the wrong way here. It's just another glitch I encountered, but I will show you how to fix that shortly. Let's go to the end and put the position to 100% and set that keyframe as well. Looking through the camera now, there's a weird glitch at the beginning, but the rest of the way, everything is fine. We need some linear motion though, so let's go to Window and Timeline and open this up here. Press S to frame all of the track and then make it linear. So it's going to be a constant speed throughout. Also this glitch at the beginning, it's only at frame 0. From frame 1 and onward, it's fine. So actually, we need to take out that first frame anyway, and you will see why shortly. So it's not really too much of a problem.